Good day, everyone, and welcome to the Center for International Defense Policy's latest iteration of our International and Defense Policy Speaker Series. I'd like to welcome here today both Peter Gasuski and Mike Rosler. Peter is an adjunct professor in the Department of Political Science and Economics at the Royal Military College of Canada. He is a recently retired senior defense scientist with Defense Research and Development Canada's Center for Operational Research and Analysis, known as DRDC Cora. He served as a strategic analyst, sorry, to the, I'm a Newfoundlander, so sometimes I have trouble with English, to the Canadian Army Land Warfare Center, also known as CALWIC, for over 20 years. He was educated at the University of Toronto and Columbia University. Peter's graduate work is in international relations. He was a MacArthur Fellow in Conflict, Peace and Security, and a Department of National Defense Fellow in Military and Strategic Studies. Over the years, Peter has provided insight and analysis on various international security and defense policy subjects. His work has been featured in multiple academic and policy forums, and I will honestly say I used a lot of Peter's work for my whole of government research in the past. His partner in crime today is Mike Rosler. Mike is a veteran of the Canadian Armed Forces. He retired from the regular force in 2011 and then served as a reservist until 2022. He obtained his doctorate in war studies from the Royal Military College of Canada, and he holds 2 master's degrees, a Master of Management in Defense Studies from the University of Canberra, Australia, and a Master of Arts in Defense Management and Policy from the Royal Military College of Canada. And dare I also say, his undergraduate degree is also from the Royal Military College of Canada. He has held several academic and research positions in defense, security, and politics. Mike is currently employed as a defense scientist with the Director General of Military Personnel Research and Analysis as a Director of Personnel Science Policy Integration Team Member. That's a lot of words, and if you talk to him after, he'll explain what it actually means. So I'd like to welcome both of you today, and we're all looking forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Howard. Well, is it indeed a great pleasure to be back here, in particular in this forum. So I'm not sure, maybe Howard, maybe Ron Bell, Hushang for sure. We used to visit when Peter and I have worked together since about 2006 at the Army Warfare Center. And we used to socialize our ideas that we had because we were in concepts. And we built new ideas around whatever we were researching at the time, new ideas, new concepts for the military, because that was our role in capability development. And so we used to come over here, and because I was a visiting defense fellow while I was doing my doctoral work, and a fellow back in the day when it was called Queen's Center for International Relations, and we used to come over and socialize different ideas to this community, as we did to other universities, sort of put the research out there to sort of build that sort of, if we could, any sort of degree of momentum, any interest, and let people, just be transparent about what we're researching and how we're going. So that's kind of what we're doing here again today with this particular presentation. It's a piece of research that Peter and I have begun to work on again. And it has a bit of leg room to maneuver, and so that's we want to just put it out there. So if there's interest in, talking to us further and maybe contributing, helping, that sort of idea, we're always open to those types of ideas. Our title of it is Whole Society Resilience in Support of Deterring Hybrid Threats in the Gray Zone. Very topical right now. If you're doing any sort of research on the future of the North America defense or in deterrence, in ideas around resilience, these are all big topical pieces right now. So we're going to talk about this morning, these topics. I'm going to talk a little bit about the context very briefly, because I know you're all well versed in all that. What's going on in the world right now. I'm going to talk a little bit about deterrence and resilience and our particular angle on what we're researching. Peter then going to take over and go do a bit of a deep dive on the two case studies that we chose to research for this particular line of investigation, Finland and Australia. He'll also talk about the key implications that we drew from those cases for Canada. And then I will talk about, I'll come back at the end of the presentation, talk about where we're going next with this research. So as we are aware, there's been increasing evidence the use of hybrid warfare being waged in the intermediate spaces or the seams of traditional ways of thinking, and it's referred to as the gray zone. In fact, Canada's defense policy recognizes the increasing use of hybrid methods in the gray zone that exists just below the threshold of armed conflict. Hybrid methods include coordinated application of diplomatic, informational, cyber, military, and economic instruments to achieve strategic or operational objectives. Canada is not immune, certainly not immune, particularly in the information environment, to these challenges. If I may say so, and echo the words of Raoul Dandurand, former Canadian politician, 1927, he said, we lived in a fireproof house. But I will attest, based on our research and other academics who have articulated this point, that we are no longer living in a fireproof house in Canada. Social and societal resilience deters by delegitimization, by denying would-be aggressors the fertile ground upon which their malicious narratives can thrive. So, sorry, just let me arrange my page here. As emergent security challenges, hybrid warfare in the gray zone will continue to evolve and present complex security challenges that undermine the credibility and legitimacy of national governments and or international alliances. As such, new approaches to deterring such threats, particularly in the information environment, as I've already alluded to, are required. With this research, we are investigating a whole of society resilience approach in the information environment, but not exclusively to the information environment, that can provide the necessary foundation from which deterrence through delegitimization can occur. Delegitimization refers to the diminishing of non-traditional opponents achieving political targets when the foundations of their political motivations, such as publicity, cohesion, sympathy among the population, are delegitimized. Sorry, that was the slide you were supposed to be seeing. While not strictly conceived as a deterrent strategy, whole of society's resilience can nonetheless bolster it. Unlike traditional state-based notions of deterrence, which focus closely on the use of military power to prevent attack, whole of society resilience offers greater potential to deter various activities that hybrid threats frequently involve, such as disinformation campaigns, hostile business practices, economic subversion, and the provision of financial support to radical political movements within target societies. Identifying the origins of such actions provide difficult, and military responses generally lack the professionalism required to address these issues. In response, a number of scholars now contend that whole of society resilience stands as a key component of what has become known as fifth wave thinking on deterrence. Such thinking distinguishes itself from previous waves by an exclusive focus on deterrence of the state and sub-state use of military threats through strict reliance of non-military vice military means. So, with that in mind, and in pursuit of this research effort, we undertook to study country case studies where whole of society resilience was well established, and those two states that we chose were Finland, largely because of its security position within Europe, and Australia, largely because of its relationship and building resilience through disaster and emergency response. So I'm now going to turn the podium over to Peter Guzewski, who will then talk more deeply about the case studies and then what conclusions we drew from those case studies themselves.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, thanks, Mike. Much appreciated that I am here today as one of your fellows now. This is the first time for me. But carrying on from what Mike said, a look at the cases of Finland and Australia provides some valuable insights into how whole of society resilience is established, how it's practiced, and how it can bolster deterrence. In Finland's case, its small population, relative isolation in the northern part of Europe, and its long and at times conflictual relationship with neighboring Russia has resulted in what is arguably one of the most developed models of whole of society resilience in existence today. Finland's approach, known as the comprehensive security model, is detailed in the government resolution for the security strategy for society. The model focuses on the application of preparedness principles at all levels of society, both regional, national, and local. Together, and also 7 vital functions of society are identified, as can be seen here on this slide. Leadership, psychological resilience, etc. You can see them all around here. And together, these vital functions support the broad and cross-sectoral nature of preparedness, which this model aims to achieve. Some of the key aspects of the Finnish model include independent resilience preparedness of business operators, organizations, communities, and households, systematic dissemination of information and training opportunities to strengthen the preparedness of citizens, a military conscription model that ensures a high level of civic understanding of defense and security, and which tends to bind the military more closely with society, training opportunities for civilian and military leaders in national and regional defense courses, a rigorous educational system, extremely important here, that strengthens societal resilience to disinformation and the ability to adapt to changing social and economic realities when required, and also a range of grassroots resilience building initiatives undertaken by journalists, by non-governmental organizations, and through civic engagement. Key capabilities include a modern, well-prepared military, a reserve army, and an extensive system of national defense courses, robust civil defense capability, also a well-functioning system to ensure security of supply, participation in a strong international security network. This includes membership in the EU, the UN, OSCE, and now NATO. This all supplements resilience building efforts both at home and abroad. A strong cybersecurity strategy, close cooperation between all domestic security organizations and agencies, including the Security Intelligence Service, the police, armed forces, border guards, etc., and a strong, sustained public-private collaboration to counter disinformation. This includes expert government teams, the use of the Finnish Broadcasting Company, NGOs, and civic engagements, initiatives by journalists, etc. Now, these resilience-focused policies and capabilities can enhance deterrence, obviously, in various ways. Certainly, the military technical means needed to deter are provided. Consistent investment in military force structure, military forces, readiness, reserve capability, etc. But many also help to ensure public awareness and understanding of the nature and implications of the potential threats the nation may face and the state's preparedness to respond to them. They can also increase chances that the actions of malign actors are detected and reported. In a sense, what Finland has developed here is in some ways, you might consider it a society-wide warning system for monitoring signs of suspicious or dangerous activity. Beyond this, the information gained can enhance prospects for timely, informed decision-making and informed deterrent responses to threats, and support for and trust in the actions that are taken by the public. Now, ensuring resilience building is a society-wide enterprise allows Finland to draw on a broad range of societal resources to address and deter hybrid challenges. One area where this is very notable is in the information domain. Measures that promote societal resilience can help delegitimize adversarial disinformation campaigns, reducing and perhaps even at times eliminating their impacts. Here, Finland's response, for example, to Russian disinformation campaigns has been exemplary. Such challenges have prompted increasing collaboration and cooperation between the Finnish government and media organizations, and as a result, greater awareness and criticism of Russian behavior from media outlets. The fact that the Russian news agency Sputnik ceased to operate in Finland following investigation and public exposure of their activities is at least somewhat suggestive of some deterrent success here. Often, though, active, targeted efforts aimed at delegitimizing nefarious disinformation efforts have proven unnecessary. It probably is due to the fact that there's been a long-standing presence of these resilience measures in society, and this has created somewhat of a deterrent shield over that society in the information domain, thereby reducing the targets that an adversary can successfully exploit. Now, turning to Australia, whole society resilience building has generally been focused on disaster response, a fact largely based on a long-standing concern over the environmental impacts of natural disasters. But it's also been due to an absence of any proximate and immediate state threat to the nation for quite a long time, for decades, in fact. Articulated in Australia's National Strategy for Disaster Resilience, this involves the adoption of an integrated, whole-of-nation effort based on 4 principles: prevention, preparedness, response, and recovery. Here, shared responsibility is a guiding principle for government and society together as a whole. All such initiatives can bolster deterrence by ensuring, I'm 1 page off. Sorry about that. A highly decentralized structure of governance ensures that much in the way of strategy implementation falls upon the nation's 6 federated territories and states, who hold much of the power for crisis management and planning. But federal efforts aimed at coordinating resilience building measures are quite a few, quite numerous, and are listed on this slide before you now. Additional efforts have followed, with initiatives to support resilience advance not only in the realm of environment, but also in areas such as cyber, defense, and encountering foreign interference. All, I would argue, attributable to a rising, more assertive and aggressive China over the years, as well as a growth in regional instability over time. Now, in terms of capabilities, it's clear that these resilience capabilities, which are still being built, by the way, increasingly reflect the realities of a changing security environment. The emphasis on addressing natural disasters certainly continues to be noteworthy, a fact driven by concerns over the impacts of climate change. And it's also evident in a range of strategy documents, frameworks, and emergency response plans, and increased funding for them. But capabilities are also growing in the other security-related areas as well. On infrastructure, it includes an infrastructure audit and plans to strengthen the resilience of infrastructure. And regarding national defense, not only has the government committed to acquisition of new military hardware, but also, and quite importantly, to promoting greater cooperation with other agencies and the public to strengthen societal resilience and greater understanding of defense and security issues. The ADF is starting to realize that resilience is extremely important for deterrence in society. On the cyber front, policy is continually updated to address threats posed by technological change and international political developments. The threat of foreign interference is addressed by measures such as a national counter-foreign interference coordinator, a counter-interference task force, and task forces to protect electoral integrity, as well as counter foreign interference on university campuses. And other measures have been developed to combat misinformation and disinformation within society in general, including social media literacy campaigns to address fake news during elections and initiatives to promote media literacy skills in schools. So in terms of support for deterrence, all such initiatives can clearly bolster it by ensuring possession of the military technical means to deter, but they also help to ensure better public awareness and understanding of cybercrime, of disinformation, and a more effective state societal cooperation and collaboration on security issues. Again, much like Finland, this can increase intelligence on the source of threats, their character, and better enable creation of instruments and strategies to deter them. As in the Finnish case, such measures offer greater capacity to address and deter hybrid challenges. The ability to delegitimize challenges in the information realm is once again quite notable. This was illustrated, for instance, in 2017 by the Australian Broadcasting Corporation's exposure of activities of a Chinese national and the United Front Work Department connected with China, aimed at influencing political processes in Australia on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party. Notably, once this was exposed, these activities not only proved unsuccessful, but additional activity stopped completely. And delegitimized efforts have also been evident in the government's naming and public shaming of various Chinese disinformation campaigns related to COVID-19. In fact, this led to calls for greater use of these strategies to counter Chinese hybrid activity, both at home and abroad, amongst a number of senior government officials. So, as these cases seem to suggest, efforts to develop whole-of-society resilience can offer important and useful means for deterring hybrid threats and activities, both generally and, as noted here, in the information domain, a domain which Mike had mentioned earlier, in which recent polling data indicates Canadians are especially concerned with. As a matter of fact, a recent Ipsos Reid poll found that 77% of Canadians are very concerned about disinformation. Now, based on examination of the cases, 4 broad measures are worthy of consideration when thinking about resilience building agenda in Canada. First, societal resilience measures should flow, ideally, from a broader national security strategy. This could be based, for instance, on Finland's comprehensive security model, though adjusted, of course, to accord more fully with the Canadian context, and could help ensure a broad understanding of societal resilience and its importance for national security, and also increase support for its pursuit. Not only could this could also help to integrate any ongoing departmental and an agency-focused initiatives into a more coherent whole. Second, resilience building initiatives must be undertaken in a spirit of true partnership between state and society. This is quite essential for creating the trust in government needed for generating the societal support, not only to pursue resilience effectively, but ensure the public is on board. Third, consideration should also be given to the development of education and training programs aimed at increasing societal understanding and awareness of hybrid threats and the steps required to address them. Benefits here will likely take some time to emerge. Yet efforts to strengthen resilience through these efforts in both Finland and Australia indicates that they can pay dividends when adequately resourced and pursued in a sustained manner. And fourth and finally, some thought might be given to creating a program to provide Canadians with personnel charged with the task of raising awareness of potential security issues that could arise within their communities, as well as the resilience building measures needed to address them. Here, creation of a cadre of, let's say, resilience specialists could be particularly useful for addressing the security concerns and challenges that could arise in Canada's remote areas, for example, in Canada's north. In fact, as Mike will explain now, the implications these ideas may hold for the reserve force provides additional food for thought. Thank you. There you go.
Thanks, Peter. So we are aware that Canadian Armed Forces is no stranger in developing holistic approaches to complex security challenges. Particularly that which you may have already surmised is embedded within this idea of whole of society resilience. From the Army's joint interagency multinational public concept to the Canadian Armed Forces comprehensive approach to whole of government as articulated in our defense policy, a broader and more inclusive decision-making process in response to complex security challenges has been evolving within Canada for probably the last 20 years. And so we have entered into that research space over the last 15 years. And so we're building on that to build and move this idea forward as a piece of research. So we are very aware right now that Canadian Armed Forces is undergoing a very big reconstitution and modernization process. And the Reserve Force, in case you aren't aware, are very much engaged in that process. Their recently published vision statement articulates the following. The Reserve Force must become a provider of operational capabilities. Reserve Force is to contribute to wider national resilience and socioeconomic needs of the communities in which they reside. They must also design and implement new and enhanced roles for reservists, Reserve Force units, and formations between today and 2034. Reservists, as you know, and their units are also well situated within communities across Canada to potentially provide resilience specialists charged with the task of raising awareness of potential security issues that could arise with some of their home communities, as well as provide resilience and building measures required to address them. And last, I will point out that ongoing discussions, these are actual ongoing discussions right now that are looking at or considering future opportunities for the government to invest in Reserve Force capabilities and capacities that will both enable strategic readiness and have direct impact on communities across Canada where the primary reserve units exist, right? Those are the words that were articulated within some policy documentation. So it is within this capacity that we find ourselves, and we are looking to do more fulsome research around building a Reserve Force capability in this regard around whole of society resilience as a deterrent measure for hybrid threats in the gray zone. Thank you. I'm now happy to take some questions. I'll just point out that we've published 2 scientific documents already on this. One is a literature review on the concept of deterrence and delegitimization itself. Alex Wilner from Carleton is the one who first articulated that position. And we have taken it now and moved it around a little bit and applied it to our situation. And the other document is a report that Peter put together on the case studies and implications for Canada.
So everyone, I will moderate the questions. I'm using the mic not for this room, even though the construction has thankfully stopped for a moment, but more so for our listeners online. So starting off, questions. Anyone?
Hi, thanks for that. Jerzy Amish from DRDC as well. Simple question. I'm curious whether, can we assume that in your case studies in Finland and Australia that the overall approach and like the buy-in for these whole society resilience approach, let's say, enjoys like widespread support across the various political spectrum, let's say.
Yeah, I was going to say, with regard to that, it is quite clear when I was doing the research in the two case studies, there is no question that Finland is the stronger of the two, largely for geopolitical reasons. Obviously, Finland has been right next to Russia for a long period of time, and that war in the 30s basically shaped an awful lot of this thinking. The entire society was involved in that fight. And so in a lot of ways, they have had a very strong connection to security ever since, well, for decades. Therefore, the comprehensive security model that they have created is almost like they're just following their natural path. They've had that tradition for a long time. The Australians, somewhat less so, largely in the area of climate change, environmental crises. However, as time has gone on, it has started to move more closely into society. In terms of both of them, I would say that trust in government, which is a good indicator of how much this approach has taken hold, is extremely strong in Finland. As a matter of fact, for the 7th year in a row, Finland has been considered the happiest country in the world. And not only that, there is a very, very close relationship, or as close as you can get given a government and the public, of people with their government. So that relationship is very, very tight. In Australia, less so, but it is still fairly strong. One thing that I would mention about this approach as well that I kind of encountered and I think is important is that in both cases, you have strong social safety nets. You have a strong social safety net in the Nordic countries, and Australia has one as well. And I think Canada, even though we complain, we still have one. And I think that's a very important part of this because I think trust in government is extremely important. So I'm not saying there wouldn't be any speed bumps in like applying this in the Canadian context, but I would also argue that in the information domain in particular, we are all becoming Finland. We are all becoming Australia. Geographic context means a bit less given the nature of the threats we're facing.
Thanks, Pete. I'll just add on to that. So as I previously mentioned, we chose Australia and Finland, particularly because number one, Finland is probably the predominant case in the world on developing whole society resilience. Yes, we know their population is much smaller than ours and they have conscription and these sorts of things, but we felt it was useful to look at what, from a security perspective, exactly how they went about doing what they're doing with resilience. Australia, you know, having lived through two seasons of fire in Australia myself, I can attest that their emergency preparedness and how they handle things is very much embedded into the society itself already. And so when we chose cases, we said, okay, what's our capacity here for the timelines we have? We could only actually we could go deep on 2 cases. And we chose to go that way instead of, say, spreading thin across 4 or 5, because there are other states out there that are actually very good in developing this idea and this concept. I'll talk about Sweden, Estonia is another one, and Lithuania. And these are other countries that actually are embedding these sorts of ideas and these approaches into their society. So I just wanted to let you know that, yes, we actually have already talked about adding more cases to this project. In particular, we haven't decided, but those were really the 2 cases that we felt, you know, based on what we're seeing in Canada and what are looking over the horizon, or, you know, at horizon 2, you know, 10, 15 years down the road, we thought they were most applicable to the Canadian context.
Thank you very much for. You can hear me, I believe. Thank you very much for the presentation. The 2 cases that you mentioned, Finland and Australia. Finland, as you mentioned, recently joined the NATO. So what kind of, how do you fit Finland in this context of NATO, vis-a-vis the other side of Russia and what is going on in Ukraine and so forth. As for Australia, how do you look at Australia in the context of the East, the US, Canada, the UK, and so forth, vis-a-vis China and other challenges in that context? Understood that you talk about Australia, mostly everything started mostly based on the disasters, natural disaster that they went through, but obviously there is a big component, a military component, defense component of that one. So if you would to put them in a larger context, NATO, and then the East in context of the American.
Yeah, Finland, I think, Finland's joining of NATO is a logical extension of what they've been doing for the longest period of time alone. Obviously, another reason why the Finnish case has been so strong is largely because during the period in which they were, against Russia in the Soviet Union, they had to take a position of non-alignment, and therefore they could not have too many powerful allies. They were on their own. An independent resilience building capacity was therefore, what do you say? So, circumstances are the mother of invention, and that's exactly what happened. But I think now the Finns are going to apply more of their thinking in a NATO context. As a matter of fact, the hybrid warfare center that is held in Helsinki is very strong, and this involves other nations in addition to Finland, a lot of other European nations, where they're trying to develop additional methodologies, additional measures to strengthen not only Finland, but also regionally, countries like Sweden and Norway, and also NATO. So I think there's a synergy there that will take place now that may not have been as explicit as it is now. In terms of Australia, again, I would say what's interesting about Australia is that, yes, it has been isolated for so long in a region that there weren't as many large threats for a long period of time. But given the fact that China's rise and all of that, and a number of other conflicts that have taken place in the region, it is certainly starting to develop its own measures. As far as its relationship with the United States, Britain, that sort of thing, that was one of the reasons why they didn't really have to worry beyond the climate change threat or the environmental threat, because really they had powerful allies. They were part of an alliance that basically was, standing off with the Soviet Union. But now, given the fact that China has become much more important, they are starting to collaborate a lot more in that area with the United States and to some extent Britain. But still, it's largely a regional issue for the Australians still.
Just to pile on a few more tidbits of information. So the resilience piece for NATO comes through Article 2. Where NATO member states are required to build resilient measures within. So I think that's a natural fit in the Center of Excellence for Hybrid Threats, which is a NATO Center of Excellence. We have Canadians in there. ASSET is also a system or a resource that we used a lot when we were getting source documentation for it. So we think it's a good natural fit for us to look at it from that strategic level. With Australia, yeah, one of the other key factors, not only emergency preparedness and climate disaster sort of a focus, was that their military is kind of like ours in size, capability, and we thought, okay, well, their population size is roughly close to us, and so it was a good to look at what they were doing, because what was it, last summer or the summer before, we had more people deployed on climate disasters than we did international operations, right, in the Canadian Armed Forces. So it was important for us to sort of get that reading and see how they were doing these sorts of resilience type efforts within the Australian Defence Force.
You may want to look at Denmark, for example, in a countries.
Yeah, yeah, and Sweden too. We almost went to Sweden instead of Australia, but
Yeah.
I kind of had to say, nope. We need to get out of Europe and we need to get somewhere outside of continental Europe and look at a different sort of strategic circumstance, right? So.
Yeah, and we also wanted to make sure that, well, in terms of Australia, there are certain similarities to Canada. And so we thought this would be interesting. And not only that, Australia, as I say, was less developed overall in terms of the comprehensive security approach for other areas like defense, cyber, foreign interference. It is developing these things. In fact, in the last 10 years, that is where all this action has occurred. Whereas with Finland, it's been around forever in a different form called total defense. The thing is, we thought to ourselves, well, Australia might also give us some clues as to if Canada wants to build this, how is Australia building it? So that was another reason why we chose Australia.
One of the other things I'll just add, because it's important to understand. So I'm looking at the reserve, but that's not the only component, the only societal actor that we're talking about here. We're doing the reserves because I know the reserves and I know what kind of role they can play in this sort of thing. There are many other societal actors that would be involved with this. It's just not the reserve component is the piece that I can break off and study, and sort of use it as sort of like a beta case study to look at how we might do this. In fact, our next step of what we're doing next is actually we're going to do a concept paper around how we might develop this concept for the reserve forces. I'm meeting with various agencies within the government of Canada and with the Canadian Armed Forces to actually, get a bead on what they think about this and how they see it playing out. And so that's how we're going to prosecute this. That's our next step. And we're going to do a couple more case studies and the concept paper as we move forward with this. So.
Okay, Mike, you may have just preempted my question. I was going to ask, are you looking at like a specialized unit of resilient specialists like CIMIC or EW, or are you looking at individuals embedded within like the PWR here in town?
So we don't know yet. That's my answer. And so, but if I was the idea that I initially had in my head was embedded into the actual reserve units, that capacity. And so when you think about that and think about what a reservist brings to the table in Canada, we do not take good account of what they do in their civilian lives, and we don't keep good records of it. So I think there's a natural, in economics terms, there's a spillover effect that we can achieve by building that capacity and capability. And let's be clear, and you know as well as I do, right? You have to incentivize it properly. And if you don't do that, you're not going to get them, or you're not going to build out that capability, right? With the support of the reserve force, because, we do not have unified reserve force across Canada. There's no unified culture. One unit is different from one unit, was different from one brigade, which is different from the East Coast, which is different from the West Coast. Yes, they're all, military. They all, carry guns and provide different capabilities, but the cultures amongst all across Canada are very different. And so we need to be appraised of that. We've done research in that area, so we understand what we're coming at to try to develop this. And let's be clear, this is not something we're expecting to do, by 2026, 2027. We're talking probably within the next decade, building that out. And so that's where we're intending to go with this.
Mike, Pete, a quick question. What kind of resistance, if any, what kind of resistance, if any, you expect from the political science, international relation fields, established paradigm to the concept of all of society deterrence? Do you think the field of IR political science would integrate that concept into the established paradigm?
I'm going to give this a try. Okay, well, I think first of all, that there has been some uptake simply by the literature that I'm seeing. On the other hand, I do think and this is my, I speak only for myself. I think there's a danger sometimes of making deterrence almost anything. And the problem is that when you're talking about delegitimization, it can become very, it's kind of, it doesn't fit exactly into, you know, your sort of traditional deterrence types of paradigms when you're talking military deterrence. However, I do not see any reason why it can't, not yet, but I'm sure there's going to be some pushback. The other question is this deterrence by denial, or is it deterrence by punishment? It's an interesting question. When you embarrass an opponent, is that punishing them, or are you simply trying to, you know, bolster your own society's resistance against what they're saying? So I think there's room for an awful lot of debate and argument here, but I do see, as we both have seen, that this is becoming a much more accepted area for research. And certainly, you know, the whole question of deterrence of hybrid conflict writ large, and the importance of resilience as part of that is extremely important, especially as societies start to realize that they're no longer, as Mike was saying earlier, we are no longer a, you know, impenetrable island. The domestic side of things is also becoming extremely important. And the extent to which citizens actually start to understand the importance of national security I think, is becoming far more clear, given the kind of world we're in. Unfortunately, for the last, you know, as long as I can remember, I mean, I don't go back as far as the Second World War, but at the same time, I would simply say that defense has always been an afterthought in Canada to a large extent. And I think there is room here to start growing an understanding of security and defense through this kind of concept.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks for the question, Al. We can talk later. I'd bring to attention a couple of things. So as you noticed in one of the slides, it has to evolve from a national security strategy. That's not something that Canada does particularly well. So we think we're going to have to bridge those sort of gaps in moving forward. We know that the current government has made some strides, but we personally, through our research, don't think that's enough. We think there has to be more. And so that's, for us, is the initial, that's where this has to flow from, I think, if you're going to build it nationwide. Our defense policy is already leaning in that direction. New vision statements, reconstitution, rebuilding asset are leaning in that direction also. And when I'll tell you, when I start to socialize the whole idea of whole society resilience, I get a lot of attention from people when I start talking that language. So I think that's going to be a work in our favor right now, because it is very popular. I won't say it's a fad, but I think it's actually, you know, something that is on the minds of a lot of people right now, a lot of government officials, basically because of the whole information environment aspect. The other one is that I want to mention is we in Canada don't teach deterrence. And I think the time has come where we have to change that. And so because we don't do that and we don't look at it, if you look at what the US does, if you look at what the UK does, you know, they put deterrence thinking, deterrence strategy, deterrence, you know, philosophies right down at its tactical level in their armed forces. We don't do that. And so this is partly why one of our other initiatives is that we are pushing to develop more of a deterrence sort of teaching, a course across, particularly right now across the military academies. And that's where we're going with this as a start. And we're hoping that we can build out from that, as you know, is because you're part of it, right? So I think that's another. And so what that does for us is, you know, if you're going to create this change, and I'm going to go back to my norms literature, you got to break it down into norms, you know, those collective expectations about what society expects from you. You got to break it down to that level to make it clear, particularly to the Canadian Armed Forces, about where we're going with this. The other strength, and I'll end on this one, is that we know capability development. We know it well, right? I'm talking about Peter and I. And, and so we know what levers to pull to move that into developing a capability. We think we have the strategic sort of impetus to get on with this, but it could be stronger, as I mentioned, through the national security strategy and thinking. So, those are three parts that I would say would address. But yes, and and the other part I mentioned earlier was about the reserve culture and getting them on board and thinking about this and building out the capability from that perspective. Okay, does that answer your question? Okay.
Several years ago, there seemed to be a lot of talk in the federal government about the whole of government approach, and should ideas and policies were developed under that, should that partially inform this, or do we need to take a fundamentally new direction as opposed to what's been done before?
Yes.
Okay. You want to elaborate?
So published through this institution, Peter and I edited a book called Comprehensive Security Operations in 21st Century, Canadian Perspectives on Comprehensive Approach. So in that document, it's McGill Queen's University Press, but we came through what is now CIP, and they contributed part to the publication. We held a conference here where all the authors came in, presented their papers, we debated them, discussed them, and pushed forward with the publication. At the time, we were very much convinced that when the government started using or articulating, they went from 3D plus C to whole of government. We were very much of the opinion that we needed to get beyond that. So about 15 years ago, we were talking about getting beyond federal stovepipes, getting and involving societal actors into that. It was very much our position. But at the time, it was probably a bridge too far. And that's why we saw whole of government pop up and become very dominant in all our policy documents and across government. We still believe that we still believe in this idea of a more inclusive, decision-making or challenging complex security issues like around the information environment. And we still firmly believe that the societal way is to go with that. And like I said early in the slide, we're building on, the GIMP capability, comprehensive approach, whole of government. We're building it, taking all that, and we're just pushing it out a bit more, building it out a bit.
I'm fine.
Okay. Yeah, Rob, is that good enough? Did that answer your question? Okay. Okay. Security operations in the 21st century. Canadian perspectives on the comprehensive approach.
Thank you for the Q&A so far in your presentation. It's really great. I was wondering if you have any thoughts on public safety, vice defense as a leader in this area of resilience. And perhaps this is another one, like your initial thoughts on activating society, like in the absence of a national security strategy, what are some initial grassroots level things that I think our reserve force could be really involved in if they can get their mindset away from consequence management and more about preparations as they sit in those provincial ops centers. Thank you.
So great question. And I'll be clear that we're using the reserve force because of their position across Canada and where they're situated across Canada. Included on that is something we're looking at the Canadian Rangers also, we include in that, right? So because the Arctic is increasingly becoming more important to us. And so we want to include them in this concept. So that's why we choose that. I would agree with you that potentially public safety is the lead on this, right? And, in the absence of them taking the lead, maybe PCO and their security apparatus sort of starts pushing out like we did with the Afghan task force, they push out. A more holistic sort of approach to this complex challenge. So that's just our thinking. I don't have an answer for you right now, but having served as a reserve CO and having seen how we integrate into the community, I think there's lots of opportunity there that we're just not capitalizing on right now. And so, everything from who's in my unit, what capabilities are, what jobs they're doing in their civilian life. It just struck me at the time that this is something that we are not leveraging. And I think if we construct it properly, like I say, we probably won't be the lead on this, but we're going to create a model that sort of gives you an idea about what that looks like. And, oh, by the way, we probably want to talk to you if you have ideas. So at some point.
Yeah, just to add on that, Mike's actually the guy to talk to about this because of the reserve focus. But I would simply say that while public safety is probably, yeah, you're right, probably the main or the natural home for this. I would even say that, you know, looking at it from a broad societal standpoint, things such as starting to teach children in schools how to critically analyze information, how to think is very important in this regard. It helps people separate out the chaff from the good stuff when it comes to reading and things like that. And this is one of the reasons why Finland's been quite successful, is that not only is their teaching system such that a public school or a grade school teacher in Finland has to get into that field is almost like equivalent to becoming a lawyer in Canada. They take education extremely seriously. I believe the Finns also have a free university. And I think in a lot of ways, a lot of these issues that we talk about when we talk about, you know, information threats are extremely related to how people are able to critically analyze and think about information and the various sources from which that comes from. That's just the top of my head sort of thing. That's, yeah.
Okay, last question to Dr. Disboni.
Quick question is, how resilience in Canada could be also important in dealing with some allies, friend countries, who might become inward and isolationist?
Oh, I wonder who you mean.
I don't want to name names. So it's really, I know it's not the focus of your report. I know that.
So what exactly is the question?
As a country, inward.
Do you want to try this again?
So
Like,
are you
protections.
asking, are we considering that, or should it be part of our calculus, or?
Well, we're still working together, but with protectionism and
Okay.
economic nationalism is
So-
the dimension of resilience there.
So when I try to sort of put this idea, this whole concept into layman's terms, and I have actually talked to resilience researchers in the US, particularly around building resilience against the information environment, particularly in the field of nuclear deterrence. They said, oh, you're inoculating your society against disinformation. And I said, yeah, that's a pretty good way to, if you want a quick soundbite, that's a good way to kind of put where we're going with this, right? And, but don't get me wrong, it rolls off the tongue easily, but we know that this is a complex issue, right? And you scratch beneath the surface and it just blows up. So
Yeah, it may also be a complex issue for another reason, and this is my own thought again. It's I haven't tested this out in the paper or anything. But I mean, one of the things I'm kind of curious about is to what extent a lot of this work depends on the heterogeneity or homogeneity of a society. In the sense that some societies that are very heterogeneous in terms of their composition it might not be as easily transferred to them, because not everybody is of the same mind. Not everybody's of the same mind anyway, but different cultures in a society, it could be much more difficult. But that's just my thoughts.
does that answer your question, Al? Okay.
You guys are gonna hang on for a bit, right?
Yeah, we're going to be hanging around.
So Mike and Peter are going to hang around. So if you have any more questions, I want to thank everybody for being such good sports. I didn't realize this was going to happen to us today, lunch hour. I would also like to say that this has been incredibly interesting to me because you've given me some fruitful ideas from some research I'm doing on special operations in the North. So, and the role of SOF and all of that. So thank you very much for this presentation on many different levels today,
Yeah.
from a personal research perspective and from the perspective of the Center for International Defense Policy. Thanks, guys.